Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, war is over if you want it. Really? Yes, indeed. Stacy.
Well, many great people throughout history have said that. Certainly great thinkers, great singers, great artists, and great businessmen. Maybe this guy, not necessarily a great guy, but, he was a good businessman. And that is Henry Ford. 100 years ago, Henry Ford suggested that wars could forevermore be prevented if only there was a currency denominated in kilowatt hours. Question, does this sound like something that now exists? Hint, think Bitcoin, time for a thread. And this is from a guy who had, he was a co-founder of Galloy, which is like that wallet being used in El Salvador. And he was responding to yet another piece of FUD from the New York Times, where they were like, Bitcoin uses more electricity than many countries, and that this is a bad thing. But what this thread is going to show is that that's actually a good thing, and exactly as Henry Ford and others, by the way, economists like Mises and Hayek and stuff like that, were saying that energy-backed money, as well as Buckminster Fuller, were saying energy-backed money is the best option.
Right, exactly. The New York Times piece is formidably off the mark, right? Because think about it, Bitcoin's becoming the global standard, monetary standard, and it's being secured at the moment with less than 0.5% of all the energy produced on planet Earth. And we know that 25% of all the energy produced is wasted energy. So a very small, minuscule amount of wasted energy that just gets wasted, not used, is used to secure a monetary network that ensures that 8 billion people have individual sovereignty and monetary freedom. So it's incredibly efficient versus everything else that's come before it. Now, in terms of it being backed by kilowatt hours and Henry Ford's observation, it's absolutely true. And essentially, Bitcoin is a realization of that dream.
Yeah. And it's important to remember, it's kind of off topic of the energy story, but the fact is that this is so unique in history in that you've had oil, or you've had gold, or you had central banks. And those were, some countries were uniquely endowed with that. And some countries, like with the central bank era, are uniquely endowed with a huge amount of force and violence that they can inflict on everybody else to use their currency. But all of them were either centralized in some way. We see that with Saudi Arabia and the US relationship at the moment. But Bitcoin is totally decentralized and totally distributed, and anybody, because of the way it uses energy, it can capture that stranded energy, and like places that were just left off the financial and banking and economic grid for centuries, decades, that they could be put back on, that they don't need to now beg Washington, D.C. for some handouts to be sent to, like, say, somewhere in South Africa, which has one of the highest rates of renewable energies in the world, the solar power available to them should they wish to tap it. Like, you can capture that stranded energy now because of Bitcoin.
Right. Here on planet Earth, it's based on energy. It goes all the way back to the Big Bang, approximately 14 billion years ago. And we're still living on the trail of energy that was started back then. And there's nothing that doesn't use energy here on planet Earth. The question is, what are you using energy for, and can you use it more efficiently? Right now, all the energy used for the fiat money world, as you point out, is backed by violence, right? As the New York Times said, the US dollar is backed by violence. Mm-hmm. That was what Paul Krugman said, their columnist. And so Bitcoin is not backed by violence. There's no way you can coerce anyone to give you their private keys if it's properly secured. It's impossible. That doesn't even apply to gold. Gold is easily confiscatable, as has been done many times before. So the amount of energy required to secure global independence for 8 billion people is a minuscule of the energy used today to put out this fiat money system. And therefore, total energy usage on planet Earth by humans, as I've said now for a couple of years, as we go to a Bitcoin standard, the energy footprint for humans would be cut in half, at least
Right. And we're going from empires to nation state and now to individual sovereignty. And there's, by the way, no more stranded energy than volcano energy, right? And El Salvador, which is one of the smallest economies on earth, is now the first to have a Bitcoin standard. And they're going to use their volcano energy, which is not only stranded, but abandoned usually. Nobody wants to live near a volcano, right? Like, who the heck wants to do that? Well, there you're going to be able to tap into that free, abundant, nothing, no force on earth is bigger than nature, right? And humans haven't been able to be as powerful as nature. And that energy is going to be tapped into. Now, back to Henry Ford, he said, one of the greatest businessmen to ever walk the earth, said Hunter. And below is a snapshot from the actual front page of the New York Tribune newspaper on December 4th, 1921. He said Ford would replace gold with energy currency and stop wars. Follow up on the tweet. In brief, Ford offers up the idea that all wars would be prevented with a currency based on energy usage. Quote, the essential evil of gold in its relation to war is the fact that it can be controlled. He said this in 1921. Break the control and you stop war.
Yeah, that's right. For the reasons we've been talking about, it's not backed by violence. It's backed by the monetization of peace, actually, when it comes to Bitcoin. And with energy, it is decentralized. You know, Buckminster Fuller said that planet Earth gets about 1,000 times more energy every day than it uses, right? There's a lot of energy around. The question is, how do you harness it and what do you do with it? And with Bitcoin, you're converting electricity into the hardest money ever known in the history of the world. And so once you do it, it can be used in perpetuity. And that has the ability essentially to distribute energy and energy usage down the granularity of that to a point where, in my view, where we're headed is a future where the whole idea of money itself changes radically. Because mostly what drives people's need or want of money is a perception of depravity. But once you're converting the energy, which is ubiquitous and infinite, into Bitcoin, all the fear of not having something or not having enough disappears. So we as a species evolve in this huge quantum leap enabled by Bitcoin. And I think in El Salvador, we're going to see something remarkable. We're going to see an economy take off. The GDP in El Salvador is about to explode higher. And that whole region's about to go fully Bitcoin, hyper-Bitcoinization. And that's going to filter up to some bigger countries. It's going to go global. And we're all living through something that is absolutely remarkable.
And I do want to add to those in El Salvador watching this, the dubbed in Spanish version, I want to warn you, now that everybody in the world knows you're airdropped some Bitcoin, and just be aware online, Max will not be contacting you. There are a lot of imposter accounts of Max. So we noticed when Max tweeted in Spanish recently, there were a bunch of scammers pretending, like new scammers emerging to try to contact you. So make sure not to give away your Bitcoin to anybody online. And in terms of this, break the control and you stop war. Break the control of the money and you stop war. Henry Ford saw this. And this is one of the shortcomings of gold, is that the vast majority of it is in the hands of the central banks. And they can do with it what they will. They control it. So they could make war wherever they want. Bitcoin is not controllable. Even somebody like Michael Saylor, who's just buying up billions and billions of dollars of it, Bitcoin has already proven in 2017 that no oligarch can stop it, because the algorithm and the distributed nature of it prevents that from ever happening. There's no one guy to appeal to. If you want the Fed to do something for you, flash back to 2008, in the middle of the worst part of the financial crisis in October. Who did Jim Cramer at CNBC appeal to? He appealed to Ben Bernanke, and Ben Bernanke listened. Print more money, lower rates, bail out the banks, and he did it, right? There's nobody to appeal to in Bitcoin. You can't, cause these imbalances. You can't interfere in the flow of the funds. You can't stop the network?
Imbalances won't disappear, but on the other hand, the imbalances won't persist. The problem with the Bernanke system, and what Jim Cramer proved in his 2008 embarrassing plead, was that the imbalance had been going on for too long, and it cracked, it broke. But with Bitcoin and a Bitcoin standard, the imbalances correct themselves very quickly. Just like you're driving a car, you're constantly correcting yourself when you're driving a car, and the net result is you're going where you're going to go. If you just kind of pointed the car that way and went to sleep, it wouldn't work out well. And that's pretty much the policy we have in the United States and around the world today, is that central bankers really don't think through much what they're doing. They just print the money, and then they go and have a cocktail and at lunch and go out to the Hamptons, and they forget about it for weeks and months and years on end. They haven't had a new thought in their head in the Federal Reserve Policymaking Committee now for almost 20 years.
Now, again, the central banks, the elite thinkers of the cable news class, they're against Bitcoin because they say it uses energy, but everybody from Buckminster Fuller to Henry Ford to Frederick Hayek all pointed out that that would be the best sort of currency to have. Now we cut to that money printer go brr, and look what they have caused, and look how they are able to control gold. And you could see that in this M2 money goes brr. Here's the charts for Bitcoin, stocks, and gold adjusted for money supply expansion. And you see money supply, the huge surge last year. Then this is Bitcoin, and this is the S&P 500. And there's gold has been declining lockstep as M2 is going up. Now, a lot of people say that's because of manipulation, that obviously this is what central banks look at the gold price. Alan Greenspan had admitted that in FOMC minutes that were released. Everybody knows that they look at the price of gold to see if people are going to keep on buying into that scheme and accept the money printer go brr. And this is adjusted the growth trajectory on the same scale. This is Bitcoin. This is the S&P 500, and that's gold versus the M2 money supply. So Bitcoin is going up.
Right. You can search online for a film that Max and Stacy made called As Good as Gold, approximately 16 years ago, which outlined this exact same thing. And so this is not new, and this is the fact that we've been living with. Bitcoin changes everything, and we're going to take a break. And when we come back, much more coming your way.
Bitcoin changes everything. War is over if you want it.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Michael Pento. Yep, he's a money manager down at pentoport.com, whose latest commentary is titled The Great Deflation of 2022. Michael, welcome back.
So good to see you, Maxwell.
Before we get to deflation, I want to ask you about gold. On both a 10-year chart and a 1-year chart, gold is down. How is that even possible against the backdrop of the fiscal and monetary stimulus that we've seen? It seems out of control. What's going on, Michael?
It's very disappointing to those who think that gold is always a great hedge against inflation all the time. I mean, we have home prices that have risen by over 19% year on year. We have PPI, high single digits, CPI, high single digits, and yet gold is down. You have to understand what drives gold. Gold is a non-interest bearing asset, and it doesn't do all that well when real interest rates are rising. And that's exactly what has been happening since late summer of 2020, which is why I sold all my gold back then. I only own 3%, 3 to 5%. I've been joggling and toggling between 3 and 5%, because by Q2 of 2022, you're going to want to own gold with both hands, because real interest rates should be falling by then, because you're going to have disinflation, deflation in Q2 of next year. But right now, you still see a lot of upward pressure on the 10-year and duration bonds. And, I'm reticent to increase that allocation right now. But real interest rates will be falling later next year, and you want to start getting and increasing your allocation as we get closer to that point in time.
Inflation in the U.S., to follow up on this, it's running apparently at the hottest it's been in 40 years. Unlike 40 years ago, however, rent is free, student debts are about to be canceled, and universal basic income is pretty much a reality. Right. So they're printing lots of money. Inflation's at a 40-year high. So how do you plug that into your view?
Inflation's a lagging indicator, and I don't look in the rearview mirror to drive, to use a staid platitude. So why did we suddenly get inflation, Max, that was way higher than the Fed ever wanted? Remember, they couldn't get to 2%. Oh, woe is me. We can't get to 2% inflation. What are we going to do? The core PCE is below 2, blah, blah, blah. Well, they figured out, they have 19,000 PhD economists at the Fed. How do we get inflation? How do we engender inflation? Well, they finally figured out, pay the U.S. citizen so much money through a government stipend and helicopter money and MMT to sit home and not produce goods, not produce services, give them more money than they would if they had a job. And oh my gosh, look, you've got booming money supply growth, the broadest money supply growth, booming, and there's no goods or services available to purchase. And they've got inflation out the so they finally figured it out. But that's rear view mirror, Max. They gave the equivalent of every American family $50,000 to go out and party. Guess what? That was 25% of GDP. Next year, it's 2% of GDP, maybe, as far as stimulus is concerned, and that's going to come with higher taxes on the rich. So that context, that fiscal cliff is going to occur in the context of a monetary cliff. Max, when was the last time that they went from printing $120 billion a month to zero? Well, that's going to happen in the first half of 2022. You have the biggest fiscal and monetary cliff in the history of the United States occurring in the next 8 months to 9 months. So why in the world, if you don't understand what causes inflation, you're one of these intractable inflationistas. Now, I'm not saying that the Fed isn't going to respond to the next crash with massive amounts of helicopter money. And the Treasury, regardless of the conflagration in DC right now, Republicans and Democrats will agree on another massive stimulus package, which will be monetized by the Fed. But that's ex post the crash.
So I don't see how this is any different than in the last 10 years, right? They threaten raising rates. Markets pull in 3 or 5%. Then they print a lot of money, and all the central banks around the world are in on it, right? They all work with each other. So what's the difference now between, I don't see any difference really. I mean, what's the difference? There's the same thing over and over again, year after year for 10 years.
The difference is, and it's a subtle difference maybe, if you're saying that the Fed cannot raise interest rates, you're exactly correct. It used to be 6% that cratered the NASDAQ in 1999, 2000. Well, then it was 5.25% that cratered the housing market. And then it was 2.25% that cratered the market in 2019. We couldn't even get to 2.5%. Well, the next iteration of a crash might not be 1%. Maybe they just end QE and the whole thing evolves into Armageddon. But it is dramatically different. If you think about Paul Volcker, the last time we had inflation was 40 years ago. Inflation was running at, in the mid-teens, Max. If you look at it the way Shadow Stats looks at it, we're back to 14%. So Volcker had to take interest rates to 20% to vanquish inflation. Well, I mean, I don't think we're going to go anywhere near 20%. I don't even think we're going to get to 2%. But could you imagine what's going to happen to the shadow banking system, the leveraged loan market, the junk bond market, when they end all of this fiscal and monetary support? Again, if you raise interest rates just back to where they were normally on the Fed funds rate, say around 5.25%, 5.5%, you're paying 40% of all the revenue on the U.S. debt. That's the interest payment on our federal debt would be 40% of all of our revenue. So, it's untenable to believe that they're ever going to be able to raise interest rates very far. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it's not going to take very much for the next crisis to occur because the level that creates chaos goes down, down, down. And I don't think we'll ever be able to really exit QE fully before the next credit crisis ensues. And then you're going to have a big problem because the Fed is going to have its hands tied. What are they going to do? Lower interest rates? Well, they'll already be at zero. So the credibility, next time we have a crisis, and it will be a 30 to 50, maybe even an 80% drop in the stock market. I just want to hasten to add that people have to look at history and in other countries. You know, the Japanese stock market peaked in 1989. For 2 decades, it fell, Max. 2 decades. Home prices fell by 45% for 20 years after their big epic collapse. Their stock market, the Nikkei Dow, fell 80%. And it can't happen here? I mean, you don't think that the Bank of Japan is as maniacal as the Fed? So here's the point. We're going to have massive, disruptive periods of both deflation and inflation. And that's the predicate for my model, the IDEC model, the inflation, deflation, and economic cycle model. All I'm saying is you have to be on the right side of that trade. Because if you look back on history, we've had boom bust cycles like we've never seen before. The duration gets squeezed. The duration between the chaos gets squeezed. And the debacles get worse and worse.
Purchasing power for my U.S. dollar, is it going up or going down?
Both. So
it's going down,
right now. So right now, it had been going down for several years. If you look at the U.S. dollar as measured on the Dixie, it's actually up in 2021.
Yeah, I'm just saying that for 100, 200 million Americans or 300 million Americans, their experience with the dollars in their pocket, the purchasing power, is it going up or going down?
It's plunging. It's plunging.
Okay.
That's not debatable. I'm not debating that.
And that's been the story for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Every single year, purchasing power of money goes down. And so my question, I get back to it, is those who do have some wealth, why wouldn't they therefore protect themselves against the plunge in purchasing power of their money by buying gold? And therefore, why is the gold price stagnant, right? There must be something else going on here. Because you've got lots of people with a lot of money. There's like 20 million millionaires in America, and they don't like having their wealth being evaporated overnight or over the year over year because of all the shenanigans going on with the money printers. So why aren't they buying gold? I mean, the answer is that they're buying these high growth stocks. That's the answer. And those growth stocks like Apple and others and Amazon are doing fantastically well. And those companies are doing fantastically well because they're buying back their own stock with all that free money coming from the Fed. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the gold can't compete with that. So why is that going to change, though? Apple's not going to stop buying back its own stock. It's a $2.5 trillion company. They have their ear of the Fed. Give us all the free money. We're going to buy back our own stock. Warren Buffett loves us. And that's going to continue now for the next 5 to 10 years. That's not going to stop, Michael.
I love it when you ask a question and answer it for yourself. It's just,
well, that's the market. You're telling me statistically, if we got real rates, they're negative, they're positive, there's this, there's that. I'm just saying that from a money management perspective, why would I go against what I see to be the fact? You know, why is Apple stock not going to go up 20% a year for the next 10 years?
Well, first of all, I manage money for a living, unlike some people. And I manage money for a living, meaning that I have to decide whether I want to buy dollars or sell dollars. If you look at periods in history when we have a global chaotic outbreak, the dollar always rises. Now, I'm not saying the dollar is going to rise against real estate, which is up 19. It's the biggest increase in real estate we've ever had year over year. It was the June figure. I'm not saying it's not going to rise against, the dollar's not going to fall against stocks. I didn't say that. I mean, I manage money for a living. I actually own some of the stocks that you mentioned for my portfolio. I am saying that the dollar will rise cyclically during periods of global chaos. It happened in 2008. It happened in 2020. It's going to happen in 2022. That's all I'm saying. And the dollar is up on the year on the DXY. That doesn't mean that me, with my dollars in my pocket, aren't losing power. Look, I'm in Naples, Florida, trying to buy real estate and set up an office, and the home prices are up 80% year over year. So there goes my dollars in my pocket. The stock market's up over 20%, and guess what? I mean, this is what they're all in business of doing. The Federal Reserve is in business of destroying your currency. But they're not different than the ECB and the BOJ and the PBOC and the Bank of England. They're all on the same team.
All right, let me ask you this. Let me jump in here for a second. I've got to ask you something because you're a smart fella. What is a reverse repo? Okay, And we got about 30 seconds. Just what is the reverse repo? For those who don't know what it is.
From the point of view of the Fed, they've printed $1.44 trillion every year for the past couple of years, and the banking system is so flooded with money. The overnight interbank lending rate is so flooded with money that it risks going below 0%, which is the bottom floor of their Fed funds rate. So the Fed has to sell bonds over $1 trillion every night just to absorb the money in the Fed funds market to take out all that excess liquidity and raise the floor of the Fed fund.
All right, we got to cut it there. We'll hold you over for a second segment. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition. Until next time, bye, y'all.